Here's a little secret that we probably don't think about often enough, which is that reading is actually highly interactive. We actually show the reader a scene, and then from the clues in that scene or the little subtle implications in that scene, the reader's trying to figure out what's happening in the story, maybe what's going to happen in the story. And we kind of take away all this emotional engagement that they have with the story when we just flat out tell them what's going on. I'm Mark Parsons. This is Coffee with the Authors, and we're going to talk about the craft and business of fiction. And today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite aspects of fiction craft, which is the use of subtext. Imagine you're watching a movie, and in this movie we're seeing a man and a woman talk in a restaurant. Maybe it's their first date or something, or maybe it's a blind date, and they're talking away, and the woman is saying all the right things to the man from the man's point of view. She says, "Oh, how interesting, tell me more about your job," or whatever. But we get these little, maybe there's like some subtle clues that maybe the woman isn't that interested in the man. Maybe she kind of looks at her watch or looks at the door or whatever. We don't really know, but they're just talking back and forth, and we're trying to figure out what's really going on here, right? Then all of a sudden the action just stops, and a narrator walks on screen and says, "Jessica here is not interested in going out with Jim over here. She's actually kind of upset with him. She doesn't like his attitude. She's bored. She can't wait to get out of here. And she's probably going to do whatever she can to bring this thing to a quick conclusion." Okay. We would hate that as moviegoers if somebody came on and explained to us what we were seeing. We'd much rather just watch what's going on, and assuming the actors and the writing is all at high quality, we can tell through these little subtle interactions, through her body language, through the way she holds herself, through her tone of voice, maybe through the way she phrases things, her words, whether or not she's actually interested in the other guy over there, in Jim over there. Or maybe we don't know. It's like, is she just going along with him to get something out of him? Does she actually like him? Does she, we don't know. And we formulate a guess. It's kind of like, I think she's going to make an excuse and say she's got to go to the bathroom. She's going to ditch out the back door and go around and get in the car and never to be seen again. And then if she does something kind of like that, somehow brings the interaction to a quick conclusion, we're like, yes, I knew it. This keeps the reader engaged, basically, because they are solving clues. They're figuring out what's going on as the story goes along. Okay, so if you would find that horrendous in a movie, the reader will also find that horrendous in a book. So don't put that in your book. Don't tell us what people are feeling. Use these little interactive clues. I'm not talking specifically about show don't tell, because show don't tell is widely misunderstood, but this is kind of along those same lines, which is, we don't really want to tell a story. We want to show the reader the story via scenes that we paint, select scenes. We don't want to show them everything. We just want to show them little select scenes here and a select scene here and a select scene here. And then they get to kind of put it together. And the way we do that is through subtext and context. And subtext can be directly in narration. It can be in third-person narration. It works really well in interiority. In other words, internal monologue, first-person internal monologue. And subtext works really well in dialogue, and sometimes in what's being said and sometimes in what's not being said. So here's a quick example from the 909 Project. Okay, our character is named Jameson. He's a young man who goes to the same street corner at the same time every night and photographs whoever's there right at that time. It's kind of a black and white, kind of a street photography project, and he's doing it. He picks that same corner at the same time for reasons that you will find out about in the book. But this is kind of an important project to him. And then when he gets done, he generally goes to this nearby coffee shop right next to the street corner he goes to, and he kind of hangs out and he works on what he's just done. And he's there afterwards, kind of doing editing on the photographs he just shot. This all takes place at night. It's the 909 Project, and the actual photography happens at 9:09 p.m. and then he goes to the coffee shop afterwards. I reviewed a few more, thinking there's definitely something here, when I realized someone was standing next to my booth. I looked up. Her. You know, you did it again today in language class with the passive voice thing. I shrugged. Questions were asked, opinions were rendered. She actually smiled at that, which did something to me. Kind of like my dad's wink at dinner, but not. I held up my camera. We all know what I'm doing here. I nodded at the laptop under her arm. So what about you? Homework? She shook her head and blinked at me, and for some reason I had the impression she felt like I'd felt the night before, trying to talk about why I was doing my photo project. No, she finally said, I'm trying to. She paused. I guess I'm doing the same thing you are. What do you say to that? I shrugged. Well, good luck. Then out of my mouth came, you know, I'd love to see whatever you're working on sometime. Really? Wow, where did that come from? She just stared at me, and all of a sudden I could hear the clank of dishes back in the kitchen, the front door swinging shut, the barista calling out someone's order. Thanks, she finally said, and things snapped back to normal. For a second, she looked like she was going to say something else. Then she turned and walked down the aisle to an empty booth. I went back to my camera and tried, without much success, to focus on my photos. Okay, so what's going on here? We don't want him to say, she looked at me and I looked at her, and for a moment we kind of caught each other's attention, and there was something there, and I was interested in her, and maybe she was interested in me, and all of a sudden we just stopped, and all of a sudden the background kind of came up, like someone turned up the volume in the background, and then poof, it went away. And then boom, we were back, things went back to normal. Wow, that was kind of weird, but it meant something to me. We don't want to say all that. You want the reader to deduce all of this through the subtext of what's going on, right? Okay, here's another example. Okay, this is a science fiction story about a young woman in her early 20s and a guy about her age, and they are making their way through kind of a bombed out wasteland about 50 years in the future, and they ended up having to kind of camp out in an old burned out apartment building during the night. They're like 5 stories up in an empty apartment building, just trying to survive the night it's a pretty hostile environment. And then in the middle of the night they were attacked, and she ends up shooting. She's got a beamer, which is kind of a handheld high energy weapon, kind of like a laser. And she ends up, they try to come in the window, and they climb up and come in the window, or they belay down with ropes. And anyways, they try to come in the window, and she's on watch. They're taking turns being on watch, and she ends up shooting them. There's 3 or 4 of them. She shoots them, and they end up falling to the ground. And then she wakes up her partner, and then they have to kind of get out of there. But before they can leave, she has to do a little quick recon to make sure there's no more bad guys kind of waiting down below. Anyway, as I finished loading the last scruff, he groaned and opened his eyes that seemed to focus on me. I paused. Why all that for us? I asked. We're just passing through. We don't have shit. Got a call, he mumbled. Someone took down headquarters on the freebie. Killed Spiker, too. Said you got off near here. Some rich bitch and her guy. We thought it was you. I fingered the mylar he was wrapped in, his burial shroud. Why this? They said you had a beamer. I looked at him. He was broken beyond all repair. I do. And then we have a scene break, right? So, what's going on here? We could say he was injured beyond all repair. There's no way I could fix him. He was a bad guy anyways. He was going to rape and rob and kill me. And so I ended up putting him out of his misery because he was near death anyways and in a lot of pain. We don't need to say all that. She asked, why do you have this? They're wearing this kind of reflective mylar. It's like a poor man's version of armor against a energy weapon or light weapon. It'd be like if someone was going to attack you with a real strong laser and you could wrap yourself up in a mirror, something very reflective. Most of the energy would be kind of, deflected away from you. So these guys are doing kind of a poor man's version of that. They wrap themselves up in reflective mylar. And they said, well, she says, what's up with this? And they said, well, we heard you had a beamer. And then she says, she looked at him, he's broken beyond repair, and she says, I do. Clearly, and then we have a scene break, which is a real good way to put emphasis on a line. Is at the end of a chapter, or this was in the middle of a chapter. Then we skip a line, have an asterisk, and then we drop down, and then we have the next scene. So it's a scene break. But that I do says everything we need to say in the subtext is, yes, I do, and I'm going to use it on you now. You were trying to kill me. You're dying here. You just fell 40 or 50 feet onto concrete. You're toast. There's no medical help anywhere around. Your 3 or 4 partners are dead. You're going to die. I'm going to put you out of your misery. You don't have to say any of that. She just kind of says, I do, and then we move on, because the intelligent reader will figure it out for themselves. The reason subtext works is because in real life, we do not have somebody telling us exactly what everything means either, just like in the movie we talked about. Stuff happens in your real life, somebody's acting a certain way towards you, and you're thinking, maybe that guy doesn't like me. I don't really understand why not. Maybe he does. Maybe he just doesn't show it very well. I don't know. And you try to figure it out as you go along. And you're constantly trying to kind of solve the little micro mysteries of life. And you want a book to feel the same way. So the real takeaway here is to assume your reader's intelligent. Because when you understate things, when you don't over-explain things, and you just show things either through subtext, or maybe some things are revealed in context of the setting or the interaction, your reader's solving all those little micro mysteries, and it makes them feel smart. They're like, oh, I get what's going on here. First I was kind of confused, but now I understand what's going on here. It could be for something tiny like the scene we just read. It's a tiny little detail, or it could be something very broad. There was in Scorpio Races, there's a wonderful scene most of the way through the book where the main girl's brother looks at a woman during this, there's half a dozen people sitting around a house, and they look at each other, and that's all we see. But that gives the astute reader the information all about her brother and why he actually wants to leave the island, and on and on and on and on and on. All this stuff, all these tumblers finally click into place when we see these 2 secondary characters glance at each other across the room for just a few seconds. It means so much. It helps. But if you didn't get it, if you were maybe a young reader and you didn't get this, the story still works perfectly well. That's why it's brilliant. Maggie Stiefvater is a great author. But that's a perfect example of subtext. Do you have an example of subtext in something you've read that meant a lot to you? Do you have an example of subtext in something you've written that you think does a good job of explaining a whole lot with just a little? So the real takeaway here is assume your reader is smart, use subtext. It will make them feel smart. It will make your book seem smart. It will make you seem smart. The reader won't feel like you're talking down to them. So it's kind of a win-win all the way across. That's my little story for today. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, the obvious, like, share, subscribe, and maybe drop a comment below about how subtext has affected your writing. And as always, keep writing.